Hi everybody, this is Cody Hoelscher with the Solomon Group at Coldwell Banker Action, and welcome back to the Real Wausau's Real Estate Podcast Show. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about 3 things for you as a buyer and a seller to do and keep in mind, specifically when purchasing or selling real estate at this time of the year. Obviously, we talked a lot about the seasonality of real estate, right? We have our winter market update, our summer market update. We talk about how this time of the year, there's less homes to sell, maybe less buyer competition. And in the summer, the opposite. More properties for sale, more buyers in the market and competition, etc. But today we're talking about specifically not market conditions, but tips for buying and selling this time of year to make sure that things go smooth for you as a buyer and seller. So without further ado, let's get started talking about selling with tip number 1. Tip number 1 is going to be to keep the heat on and don't be skimpy about it. So a lot of times a seller is maybe moving out of state or moving out of the area or just into a different property, and they want to make sure that they're not going to waste a bunch of money by keeping the heat on. And so what they'll do is they'll set the heat to a pretty bare minimum temperature, maybe say of 50 degrees, just to keep the pipes from freezing and to keep a little bit of heat in the home. And that does exactly what you would think it would do. It's going to lower your utility bill quite a bit. But unfortunately, there's some consequences of that probably aren't worth the benefit of the few extra bucks you might save. And that's specifically when it comes to buyers walking through the property. I can just tell you firsthand that when a buyer goes into a house, it's winter outright, you get out of your car, you're cold, you're expecting to get into the house and it's nice and warm, and you get in there and it's freezing cold, it definitely puts a damper on the mood. And specifically, it hurts you as a seller because a lot of times when buyers walk into the house, right, you want them to be able to take their time, to really walk through the property and give it some thought, ask questions to their agent, conversate with their agent, and take their time. And I can just tell you from personal experience that when the property is cold like that, buyers are very quick in and out the door. They don't take a lot of time looking through the rooms. They're pretty much in, they zip around, maybe check out the basement real quick, and they're back out to their car and they say, hey, you know what? We're going to think about this on the drive home or to the drive to the next property, and we'll get back to you on it. And so really it does more harm than good. And I'm not saying that you have to have your thermostat turned up all the way to 70 degrees, but to at least keep it at minimum in the low 60s, if not a little bit higher, is probably beneficial and will make the showing experience for potential buyers quite a bit better. The other thing is, if you're currently living at the property, this time of the year with how early the sunset is, a lot of times we are showing these properties in the dark. And so what you can do as a courtesy to the agent and the buyers before a showing, if you have the capability to, is to flip the lights on. I can just tell you from personal experience that when you go to a property and you're fumbling to get your phone out and turn the flashlight on to get the key out of the lockbox, and then you're walking in the property and you're flipping on the light and the buyers are behind you, it is a little bit awkward. And that typically is something we don't have to deal with during the summer when it's light out so much later. But this time of the year, we do. And so if you can do a courtesy and flip the lights on before showings, it definitely helps not only the agent and the buyers, but it does help the property to look better and to show better. Moving on to number 2, this one is going to be keep the sidewalks clear of snow and ice. This is really important, right, as we are bringing in buyers of all sorts of ages. It might be an older couple who has some mobility issues, maybe young children with their families, and of course we know that kids trip and fall quite a bit. Or mom and dad. Mom and dad sometimes are busy watching the kids. Maybe they're on their phone. It's very easy to trip and fall if there's snow and ice on a driveway or a sidewalk. And so just do everybody a favor and try to keep that driveway snow plowed or shoveled and that sidewalk clear. Throw down some salt to make sure that the ice is melted. And by doing that, not only is it going to be easier for the client to walk through, but you're also going to eliminate a lot of the trip and fall hazards, which is great for everybody. Number 3 now is going to be to print the utility bill. One of the most common questions that we get asked as agents is, hey, Cody, what is the average utility bill for the seller this time of the year? And so rather than us having to go to the agent and then the agent go to the seller and then them send it back and forth, it is really nice and convenient if we are able to just have that printed utility bill on the counter, or maybe the agent has it and they can share it. And it's not to say that it's a deal breaker for a buyer if the utility bill is maybe a little bit higher than average. I think that a lot of buyers just kind of want to know what they can expect this time of year to factor that into their budget. That way there's no surprises. And so if you do that, it's a really big help to both buyers and agents alike. Moving on to the buying side of things now, starting with number 1 is going to be to check and change the furnace filter. This is more so for after you've closed and you're moving into the property. I can just tell you that a lot of furnace filters get overlooked during the selling process. And it's not that sellers are intentionally trying to, not change them or save the money. A lot of times there's just a lot of stuff going on, right? You're moving, you're packing, you're trying to coordinate everything. It's stressful, right? And so changing that furnace filter probably isn't on the top of your agenda. And so once you buy the house, it's a really good idea to go and check the furnace filter. And if it needs to be replaced, go to your local home improvement store or any general store that sells them, pick up a few of them, head back home and replace them. Moving on to number 2, going to be to check windows and doors. This is more pertaining to when you're actually looking at properties and you're in, kind of that time frame between looking and writing an offer. It's a good idea to kind of check out the windows and the doors. Obviously, if you have a house that has older windows and older doors, it's going to let in more air, there's going to be more draft, and it's going to be less thermally efficient. And if you're looking at 2 houses that, say, are both of a similar price point, but one has brand new windows and the other has older wood windows that are maybe in kind of rough shape, obviously, right, we can say that the house that has newer windows might be a little bit more appealing to you. And of course, there's a lot of other factors to take into consideration. It's not just the windows, but in the case of thermal efficiency, windows and doors do matter quite a bit. And so it's good to just check those things and take those things into consideration when you're looking. That way, you can say, hey, this house has new windows and doors. I don't have to worry about it. Maybe this house, the other house doesn't have those new windows and doors, and so you can expect your utility bill to maybe be a little bit higher. And again, it's not a right or wrong. It's just some things to take into consideration when looking. That way there's no surprises. Moving on to tip number 3, it's going to be to call and set up your WPS service. So one of the things that is very common when you sell a house is you'll typically call WPS or whoever your local service provider is, and you will let them know that you're going to be moving out of the property on X date and that you'll no longer be needing service there. And typically that's going to be your last day would be the day before closing, and then the day of closing, the buyer is going to assume that responsibility. And vice versa, typically as a buyer, you'll call WPS or your local service provider a week before closing, maybe a little bit longer than that, and you will establish service starting the date of closing. You might have to set up an account if you're a new WPS customer, but whatever the case is, buyer and seller take care of that. But what can happen is that if you as a buyer forget to do that and the seller calls and they are stopping their service on a certain date, what can happen is that if you forget to call as the buyer, your gas and your electricity could be disconnected. And I can just tell you from stories I've heard that it's not fun when it's freezing cold outside and you have the moving truck and everything lined up. You go sign at closing, and then you go to the property and the electricity is off and the gas is off. Because it can actually take a few days for them to reestablish service once the service has been disconnected. And so definitely do yourself a favor and remember to call WPS, set up service if you haven't, because you don't want to be put in that situation. That's going to wrap up today's episode of the Real Wausau's Real Estate Podcast Show. As always, we thank you all for listening. And if you have any topic ideas, any questions, feel free to reach out. And we hope that you listen and join us for next week's episode.